Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you went there? Stood in front of the refrigerator with no memory of what you were looking for? Reached for a word that used to come instantly, but now hovers just out of reach? If you're over 30, you've probably noticed this happening more often. If you're over 50, it might feel like a daily occurrence. And if you're lying here tonight, worrying that your memory isn't what it used to be, wondering if this is normal or the beginning of something worse, here's what you need to know. Your memory is changing. That's not speculation. That's not fear. That's neuroscience. From the moment you turn 25, certain types of memory begin a slow, measurable decline. By 40, the changes become noticeable. By 60, they're undeniable. You forget names more easily. You lose words mid-sentence. You walk into rooms and stand there confused. You read the same paragraph 3 times before it sticks. You introduce the same story in conversation, forgetting you already told it yesterday. And here's what makes this so unsettling. You remember perfectly well what memory used to feel like. You can recall with painful clarity a time when names came effortlessly, when you could hold 7 different tasks in your mind simultaneously, when you could read something once and retain it. That younger version of yourself, the one with the sharp, reliable memory, they're still there in your consciousness, still the person you think of as you. But the brain that once served them so reliably is changing in ways that feel like betrayal. But here's what's fascinating, and here's what might actually comfort you tonight as you're lying there. This isn't a design flaw. This isn't your brain breaking down randomly. This isn't evidence that something has gone terribly wrong with you specifically. The way your memory changes as you age, it follows patterns, predictable patterns, patterns that make sense when you understand what memory actually is, what it evolved to do, and why a brain optimized for a 30-year lifespan behaves strangely when asked to function for 80. Your ancestors, the ones who lived 50,000 years ago, they had the same brain architecture you have, the same hippocampus for forming new memories, the same prefrontal cortex for working memory, the same networks for storing and retrieving information, but they almost never got old enough to experience what you're experiencing. The average human lifespan for most of our evolutionary history was 30 to 40 years. Maybe 50 if you were exceptionally lucky. The idea of living to 70, 80, 90, that's brand new. We've been modern humans for 300,000 years, but we've only been regularly living past 60 for about a century. Your brain wasn't designed for this, wasn't optimized for decades of memory accumulation, decades of cellular aging, decades of maintaining neural networks that were never meant to last this long. And the result is what you're experiencing. A memory system that worked brilliantly for the lifespan it evolved for, beginning to show its age in ways that range from mildly annoying to genuinely frightening. But here's the thing that might change how you think about those forgotten words and misplaced keys. Your memory isn't failing randomly. It's changing in specific ways, for specific reasons, following patterns that have everything to do with what memory evolved to prioritize. Some types of memory decline, others improve. Some knowledge fades while other knowledge deepens, and understanding these patterns, understanding what's actually happening in your brain as you age, it might not stop the changes, but it might help you stop fighting them. Stop judging yourself for experiencing exactly what every aging human brain experiences. Over the next 2.5 hours, we're going to trace the story of human memory from its evolutionary origins to your experience tonight. We're going to explore why certain types of forgetting increase with age while others don't. We're going to walk through what's actually happening in your neurons, your synapses, your neurotransmitter systems as the decades pass. Where we're going to look at the difference between normal age-related memory changes and the pathological ones you might be worried about. And we're going to end up, perhaps, in a place of greater peace with a brain that's doing exactly what it evolved to do, just in conditions it was never designed to handle. If you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. So maybe subscribe and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Someone in Perth at dawn, someone in Chicago at midnight, someone in London. in the quiet hours before morning. All of us lying in our beds, carrying brains that remember some things perfectly and forget others completely, trying to understand why we are the way we are. So get comfortable, let your breathing slow. You don't need to fight the forgetting, you don't need to judge yourself for it. Just listen, and let's walk together into the deep past to understand what memory actually is before we can understand what happens when it changes. Picture this. It's 200,000 years ago. Somewhere in East Africa, a woman in her early 30s is teaching her daughter which plants are safe to eat. The daughter is perhaps 12, old enough to gather food independently, young enough that mistakes could still be fatal, and the mother is demonstrating a crucial distinction, one that will determine whether her daughter survives to pass this knowledge forward to her own children someday. There are two plants growing side by side. They look remarkably similar. Same general leaf shape, same height, same colour, growing in the same environments, often intertwined, but one of them will nourish you. The other will make you violently ill. Some seasons, it might even kill you. The mother picks a leaf from one plant. She holds it up to the light, shows her daughter the subtle difference in the vein pattern. She crushes it between her fingers, has her daughter smell it. There's a slight bitterness that the safe plant lacks. She touches it to her daughter's tongue, just the tip, not enough to cause harm, but enough to register the faint astringent taste that means danger. Then she does the same with the safe plant. Different smell, different taste, subtle differences, but unmistakable once you know what to look for. And the mother repeats this, again and again, day after day, until her daughter's memory has carved this distinction into neural pathways deep enough that she'll remember it 30 years from now, even if she never sees these plants again. This is memory doing what it evolved to do, not storing every detail of every day, not maintaining a perfect archive of all experiences, but capturing with crystalline clarity the information that determines whether you live or die. The memory of that bitter taste, that distinctive vein pattern, it will outlast almost everything else this daughter experiences. It will remain sharp and accessible when memories of what she ate for dinner fade within hours, when memories of casual conversations vanish overnight, when the names and faces of people she met briefly disappear completely. Your memory isn't a recording device. It never was. It's a survival tool, shaped by millions of years of evolution to prioritize certain types of information over others. And understanding those priorities, understanding what your memory was designed to preserve and what it was designed to let go, that's the foundation for understanding why it changes the way it does as you age. The woman teaching her daughter about plants, she's probably in her early 30s. In her time, in her environment, that makes her old. Not elderly, but approaching the end of her expected lifespan. If she lives another 10 years, she'll be fortunate. If she lives another 20, she'll be extraordinary. Most of the people she grew up with are already dead. Killed by predators, infection, injury, childbirth, violence, starvation. She's a survivor, and the memory that helped her survive is now helping her daughter survive. But here's what's crucial. That woman's memory at 32 isn't dramatically different from what it was at 22. She might be a bit slower recalling some things. She might occasionally lose a word or forget a name. But the core functions of her memory, the ability to learn new survival information, to recall critical knowledge, to teach her skills to the next generation, these are all intact, because her memory only needed to work reliably for about 30 years. That's what natural selection optimized for, not 50 years, not 70, 30, maybe 40. The brain architecture that could maintain the sharp memory function through 3 or 4 decades of life that was sufficient, more than sufficient. Humans with that architecture survived, reproduced, passed their genes forward. The question of what happens to memory at 60 or 70 or 80, evolution never needed to answer that question. Almost nobody lived long enough for it to matter. So your brain, the one you're using right now to listen to this, is built on that 30 to 40 year plan. All the mechanisms that maintain memory, that create new memories, that keep neural pathways healthy and functional, They're designed for a lifespan that most humans throughout history never exceeded. And when you push that system beyond its designed lifespan, when you ask it to function for twice as long as evolution planned for, things change. Not all things, not all types of memory. That's important to understand. Your memory isn't failing uniformly. It's changing selectively in ways that reflect its evolutionary priorities. Some types of memory remain remarkably stable even into very old age. Others begin declining in your 20s and continue declining steadily for the rest of your life. And the pattern of what stays strong and what fades, it tells a story about what memory evolved to preserve. Let's stay with that mother and daughter for a moment longer, because their experience illustrates something fundamental about how memory actually works. The daughter will remember the bitter taste of that poisonous plant for the rest of her life. That memory will remain vivid, accessible, reliable. 50 years from now, if she lives that long, she'll be able to close her eyes and recall exactly how that leaf felt crushed between her fingers, exactly what it smelled like, exactly the way her mother's voice sounded when she said, "Never eat this one." But she won't remember what the weather was like that day, won't remember what else they talked about, won't remember if they gathered one basket of food or two, won't remember if they encountered anyone else during that gathering trip. All of those details, perfectly present in her awareness when they happened, will fade within days. Within weeks, they will be gone completely. Not because her memory is bad, but because her memory is good, because it's doing exactly what it evolved to do. Preserve what matters, discard what doesn't. This is the first thing to understand about memory. It's not designed to keep everything, it's designed to keep the right things. The things that improve your survival, your success, your ability to navigate your environment and avoid danger. Everything else, the vast majority of your daily experience, is designed to fade, to be forgotten, to make room for new information that might be more immediately relevant. Your ancestors lived in a world of limited storage capacity. The brain uses about 20% of your body's energy despite being only 2% of your body's weight. Memory storage is metabolically expensive. Every neural connection you maintain, every synaptic pathway you preserve, it costs energy. Energy that for most of human history was scarce. You couldn't afford to remember everything. You had to be selective. You had to prioritize. So memory evolved to prioritize. Threats got remembered with crystal clarity. Food sources got encoded deeply. Social information, who to trust, who might betray you, that got preserved. Skills that took time to learn, toolmaking, plant knowledge, tracking abilities, those got stored in ways that made them accessible even decades later. But mundane daily details, routine experiences, conversations that contain no new information, those were allowed to fade almost immediately. This is still how your memory works. Right now, tonight, as you're lying there, you remember threats. You remember important social information. You remember skills you've practiced. But you don't remember what you had for lunch on this day last week. You don't remember the weather on Tuesday. You don't remember most of the conversations you had yesterday, unless they contain something emotionally significant or useful. This isn't a bug. This is the core feature. Your memory is a filter, not a recorder. And it's filtering based on priorities established millions of years ago in an environment where remembering the wrong things could get you killed, and forgetting the right things could get you killed faster. Now, let's fast forward. Let's come to you, to your life, to your experience of memory changing as you age. When you were 20, you could hold 7 items in working memory simultaneously. 7 phone numbers, 7 things on your to-do list, 7 points you wanted to make in a conversation. This is what psychologists call your working memory capacity, and it peaks in your early 20s. By 30, it's down to 6 items. By 40, 5. By 60, maybe 4. This decline is measurable, predictable, universal. It happens to everyone who lives long enough. When you were 20, learning new information felt effortless. You could hear a name once and remember it. You could read something and retain it. You could learn a new skill and pick it up quickly. The neuroplasticity of your young brain, its ability to form new connections, to strengthen pathways through practice. It was operating at peak efficiency. By 40, that same process takes more time, more repetition, more effort. You need to hear a name 3 times before it sticks. You need to read something twice to retain it. You need more practice to master a new skill. Your brain can still learn, can still form new memories, but the process is slower, takes more energy, requires more conscious effort than it used to. When you were 20, retrieving memories felt automatic. You thought of a word and it appeared. You tried to recall a fact and it was there. The pathways between storage and retrieval, between knowing something and accessing that knowledge, they were clear and fast. By 60, those pathways have degraded slightly. The myelin sheaths that insulate neurons, making signals travel faster, they've thinned. The neurotransmitters that carry signals across synapses, they're slightly less abundant. The result is that you still know the word you're looking for. The memory is still there, but accessing it takes longer, sometimes much longer. Sometimes you need to come at it sideways through associations rather than retrieving it directly. This is what you're experiencing when a word hovers just out of reach. When you know something but can't quite bring it to consciousness. The information isn't gone, the memory isn't lost. But the retrieval pathway, the route from storage to awareness, it's slower than it used to be. It takes a few extra seconds, sometimes a few minutes. Sometimes you need to stop trying and let it surface on its own. All of these changes, they're normal, they're universal, they're not signs that something has gone wrong with you. They're signs that you're aging, that you've lived long enough for your brain to show its age, that the 30-year plan your neural architecture was built on has been exceeded. And here's what's interesting. Here's what complicates the picture. While these changes are happening, while working memory capacity declines and processing speed slows and retrieval becomes less automatic, other types of memory are actually improving. Your vocabulary continues expanding well into your 60s and beyond. Your ability to understand complex ideas actually increases with age. Your capacity for wisdom, for pattern recognition across domains, for seeing connections that younger minds miss, this gets better. Not worse, better. Your memory for emotional meaning deepens. You might forget the specific details of an event, but you remember how it felt, what it meant, why it mattered. You forget the exact words someone said, but you remember the essence of the conversation. You forget what you did on a particular day, but you remember the overall arc of that period of your life. This is memory reorganizing. Shifting from detail-oriented storage to meaning-oriented storage, from breadth to depth, from quantity to quality. It's not better or worse, it's different. Adapted for a different phase of life than your memory at 20 was adapted for. That woman teaching her daughter about plants, if she lives to be 50, she'll have forgotten most of the specific gathering trips they took together. But she'll remember the teaching. She'll remember the relationship. She'll remember the feeling of passing knowledge forward. And that emotional, relational memory will be clearer and more stable than her memory for mundane details ever was. You're experiencing the same reorganization, the same shift from a memory optimized for learning new information quickly to a memory optimized for preserving meaning and wisdom. It feels like loss because you remember what the other kind of memory felt like. But it's not just loss, it's also transformation. Your memory is adapting to a phase of life your ancestors rarely reached, using the only mechanisms it has available. Let's go back again, back before that mother and daughter, back to when memory itself was first evolving in primate brains. Picture an ancestor from 5 million years ago. Not quite human, not quite ape, something in between. They live in trees, they eat fruit, they have social groups, and they have a memory. Simple memory compared to what you have now, but memory nonetheless. They remember where fruit trees are located. They remember the routes through the forest canopy. They remember who their allies are and who might steal their food. This memory is encoded in neural structures that you still have. The hippocampus for spatial memory, the amygdala for emotional memory. The basic architecture was already in place. But here's what they don't have. They don't have the capacity for episodic memory. for remembering specific events as narrative sequences, for taking an experience and encoding it as a story they can replay later. That capability, that type of memory, it evolved later, much later, possibly as recently as 500,000 years ago, possibly only in the human lineage, and it evolved because humans needed it, needed the ability to remember not just where food is, but when it will be available, not just who their allies are, but what those allies did in specific situations, not just that certain plants are dangerous, but the specific circumstances under which their mother taught them this knowledge. This narrative memory, this ability to encode and retrieve specific episodes from your life, it's what makes human memory different from other primates, but it's also what makes human memory vulnerable to aging. Because episodic memory, memory for specific events and details, it depends heavily on the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is one of the brain regions most affected by aging. From your mid-20s onward, you lose neurons in your hippocampus. The rate of loss is slow but steady. By the time you're 70, your hippocampus has shrunk measurably. It's still functional, still able to encode new memories, but less efficiently than it was at 20. This is why you forget specific details more easily as you age, why you can't remember where you put your keys or what you had for breakfast or the name of the person you met yesterday. These are all episodic memories, specific events, exact details, the type of memory that requires a fully functional hippocampus to encode and retrieve. But your semantic memory, your memory for facts and concepts and general knowledge, that's stored differently, in networks distributed across your cortex. And those networks, while they slow down with age, they remain remarkably stable. You don't forget the capital of France as you get older. You don't forget how to read or do basic math or drive a car. These semantic and procedural memories, they're more resistant to aging than episodic memories are. So the pattern of what you forget and what you remember, it reflects the underlying brain architecture. The systems that age faster show there are effects in specific types of memory loss. The systems that age more slowly preserve their associated memories longer. None of this is random. All of it follows from the structure of your brain and the differential aging of its component parts. Now, let's bring this forward to something you might have noticed yourself. The difference between remembering something from your childhood and remembering something from last week. You probably have vivid memories from your childhood, specific moments that you can recall with remarkable clarity even decades later. The smell of your grandmother's kitchen, the feeling of learning to ride a bike, the embarrassment of something that happened at school. These memories encoded when you were young, they've remained accessible through all the years since. But you can't remember what you did last Tuesday afternoon, can't recall most of the conversations you had last week, can't remember the details of routine experiences from a month ago. These recent memories, formed by your older brain, they don't have the same staying power that childhood memories had. Why? Part of it is encoding strength. When you were young, your hippocampus was at peak efficiency. The memories you formed then were encoded strongly, with robust neural connections that have proven durable across decades. The memories you form now with a slower, less efficient hippocampus, they're not encoded as strongly. The connections are weaker, more vulnerable to fading. But there's another factor: emotional intensity. Most childhood memories that you still recall, they're attached to strong emotions. Joy, fear, embarrassment, wonder. These emotions, processed by your amygdala, they enhance memory encoding. They make memories stick. And childhood, with its constant novelty and emotional intensity, it generated a lot of memories worth preserving. Your recent daily life, in contrast, it's probably more routine, less novel, less emotionally intense. The memories you form are often mundane, unremarkable, not tagged with the kind of emotional significance that would prioritize them for long-term storage. So they fade. Not because your memory is broken, but because your memory is still applying the same filter it always has. Preserve what matters, discard what doesn't. This creates an interesting effect. As you age, your sense of your own past becomes increasingly weighted toward your youth. You remember your 20s and 30s vividly, your 40s and 50s less so. Your recent past, your 60s or 70s, it can feel like it's passing without leaving much trace. This isn't because your recent life is less meaningful. It's because the combination of reduced encoding efficiency and reduced novelty means that fewer memories are being stored strongly enough to last. Some people find this distressing, feel like their current life is somehow less real because they're not remembering it as clearly. But there's another way to see it. The memories you're keeping, even now, even with an aging brain, they're the ones that matter. The moments of genuine connection, the experiences that touch you emotionally, the knowledge that deepens your understanding. These are still getting encoded, still being preserved, just more selectively than when you were young. Your memory at 60 isn't trying to compete with your memory at 20. It's doing a different job, focusing on different things, optimized for wisdom rather than novelty, for depth rather than detail, for meaning rather than mere accumulation. This is an adaptation, not a failure. Let's look at one more aspect of how memory worked in the deep past. The social dimension. That mother teaching her daughter she's not just transferring information. She's embedding it in social context. The knowledge of which plants are safe isn't stored as isolated facts. It's stored as part of a relationship, part of a moment of connection between mother and child, part of a lineage of knowledge passed down through generations. This social embedding of memory, it made the information more durable, more accessible, more likely to be passed forward. Because humans are profoundly social creatures, our memory isn't designed to function in isolation. It's designed to work in concert with other memories, other minds, other people who can help us remember what we've forgotten. Your ancestors didn't need perfect individual memory because they had distributed memory. The group remembered more than any individual could. If you forgot something, someone else in your band probably remembered. If you couldn't recall a piece of knowledge, you could ask someone who knew. Memory was a collective resource, not just an individual capacity. This is still true. Your memory works better in social context. You remember stories that you've told to others. You remember information that you've discussed with friends. You remember experiences that you've shared. The act of social sharing, of embedding memory in relationships, it strengthens encoding and enhances retrieval. As you age, the social dimension of memory becomes even more important. When you can't remember a name, your spouse might. When you've forgotten a detail from the past, a friend who was there can fill it in. The distributed memory of your social network compensates for individual forgetting. This isn't cheating. This is how human memory was designed to function. But modern life, it often isolates people as they age, weakens social networks, reduces opportunities for collective remembering. And this isolation can make memory problems feel worse. Not because your memory has declined more than it would have otherwise, but because you've lost access to the social scaffolding that used to support it. This matters. When you're thinking about your changing memory, consider the social context. Are you trying to remember things alone, in isolation, without the support of others who share your experiences? If so, that's harder than it needs to be. Human memory evolved to be collaborative, to be enhanced by conversation, by shared storytelling, by the collective reconstruction of events. Using your social network to support your memory isn't a weakness. It's using the system the way it was designed to be used. The night is deepening now. You've been lying here listening, perhaps feeling the edges of sleep approaching. And maybe some of what you've heard has shifted how you think about those forgotten names, those lost words, those moments when your memory doesn't deliver what you expect it to. You're not broken. You're aging. Your memory is changing in ways that reflect both its evolutionary design and the unprecedented challenge of functioning far beyond the lifespan it was optimized for. Some of these changes are losses, real losses, types of memory that worked better when you were young and work less well now. But other changes are transformations, shifts from one type of remembering to another. From detail to meaning, from breadth to depth, from rapid encoding to careful integration. And through it all, the core functions that memory evolved to preserve, they're still there. You still remember the things that matter most, the people you love, the knowledge that defines who you are, the skills you've spent a lifetime developing, the emotional texture of your experiences. These deep memories, these meaning-laden memories, they're often more stable in old age than the surface details that fade more quickly. But we're just beginning. We've established what memory is, how it evolved, why it changes with age. Now we need to go deeper. We need to understand the specific mechanisms of these changes, the cellular processes, the chemical shifts, the structural reorganizations, because the more you understand about what's actually happening in your brain, the less mysterious and frightening the changes become. So stay with me. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body settle. The story of your changing memory, it's a story millions of years in the making, and we've only just started to tell it. In the next part, we'll explore the biology of memory aging, the synapses and neurotransmitters, the proteins and genes, the concrete physical changes that explain why you forget more easily now than you did 20 years ago. Not to frighten you, but to illuminate, to make the invisible visible, to show you that this process, uncomfortable as it is, follows rules, follows patterns, makes sense when you understand what's happening beneath the surface of your awareness. Your memory is changing, but it's not gone. It's not failing randomly. It's adapting, reorganizing, doing the best it can with architecture designed for a different lifespan, in circumstances evolution never anticipated. And that's actually remarkable, that your brain functions as well as it does for as long as it does, that you can remember anything at all after decades of accumulation, that the 30-year plan has stretched to accommodate 70 or 80 or 90 years, and mostly still works. So rest now. The details can wait. The full understanding can develop over the hours ahead. For now, just know this. Your changing memory is a sign that you've lived, that you've exceeded the expectations evolution had for you, that you're navigating territory your ancestors rarely reached, and doing so with a brain that's trying its best to serve you. That's enough for now. That's the foundation. The rest will build on it piece by piece until the full picture emerges. Sleep if you need to, listen if you can. Either way, you're safe here. And in the next part, we'll continue our journey into understanding what it means to remember and forget in a brain that's grown older than evolution planned for. Before we can understand the true scale of what happened, we need to go back to the fundamental unit of memory. Not to ancient humans or evolutionary pressures, but to something smaller, more immediate. The actual physical substrate where memories live. A memory isn't an abstraction. It's not stored in some ethereal mental space separate from your body. Every memory you have exists as a physical pattern in your brain. A network of neurons connected by synapses, strengthened through repeated activation, maintained by ongoing cellular process. And when we talk about memory changing with age, we're talking about physical changes, measurable alterations in brain tissue, in cellular function, in molecular processes. This might seem reductive, like we're diminishing the richness of memory by reducing it to biology. But there's something profound in understanding that your memories, all of them, from your first kiss to the conversation you had yesterday, they're written in the physical architecture of your brain. They exist as real, tangible structures. And when those structures change, your experience of memory changes with them. So let's start at the cellular level. Let's look at what a memory actually is, physically, before we can understand what happens to it over decades. Picture a single neuron in your brain. It's a cell, but unlike the cells that make up your skin or your liver, this cell is designed for communication. It has a body, where the nucleus and most cellular machinery live. It has dendrites, branch-like extensions that receive signals from other neurons. And it has an axon, a long fiber that sends signals to other neurons. The point where an axon from one neuron meets a dendrite from another, that's called a synapse. And the synapse is where memory lives. Not in any single neuron, but in the pattern of connections between neurons, in the strength of those connections, in the ease with which a signal can travel from one neuron to another. When you form a new memory, what's actually happening is that certain synapses are being strengthened. The neurons involved in processing the experience you're having, they start firing together. And as they fire together, the synapses between them change. They grow. They become more efficient. They make it easier for the same pattern of activation to happen again in the future. This is how memory encoding works at the cellular level. Experience creates patterns of neural firing. Repeated patterns strengthen the synapses involved. And those strengthened synapses, that network of enhanced connections, that's the physical embodiment of your memory. This process, called long-term potentiation, it's remarkably sophisticated. At the synapse, changes happen at multiple levels simultaneously. The receiving neuron grows more receptors for neurotransmitters. The sending neuron releases neurotransmitters more efficiently. The physical structure of the synapse expands. New proteins are synthesized to maintain these changes. All of this happens because you had an experience worth remembering. And here's what's crucial for understanding aging. Every step of this process requires cellular machinery that needs to be maintained, genes that need to be expressed, proteins that need to be synthesized, energy that needs to be supplied, cellular quality control systems that need to clear out damaged components. When you're young, all of these systems work at peak efficiency. But as you age, every single one of them gradually declines. The decline isn't dramatic, it's not sudden. It's a slow erosion of efficiency across dozens of cellular processes, each one contributing a small amount to the overall change in how memory functions. Let's walk through some of the key changes. First, there's the issue of protein synthesis. Every time you form a new memory or maintain an existing one, your neurons need to make new proteins. These proteins are what physically change the synapse, what strengthen the connection, what make memory persistent. This protein synthesis is controlled by genes, which need to be activated in response to the neural activity that represents your experience. In young brains, this process is fast and efficient. The genes respond quickly to neural activity. The proteins are synthesized rapidly and accurately. The whole chain from experience to molecular change to stable memory, it happens smoothly. In aging brains, each step takes a bit longer. The genes respond more slowly to activation signals. The cellular machinery that synthesizes proteins works less efficiently. The quality control systems that ensure proteins are folded correctly and transported to the right places, they're not quite as reliable. The result is that memory formation at the molecular level becomes a slower and less certain process. You experience this as needing more repetition to learn something new, needing to hear a name multiple times before it sticks, needing to practice a skill more before it becomes automatic. Your brain is still capable of forming new memories. The machinery still works, but it requires more input, more repetition, more time to achieve the same result it would have achieved more quickly when you were younger. Then there's the issue of neurotransmitters. These are the chemical messengers that carry signals across synapses. When an electrical signal reaches the end of an axon, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters into the gap between neurons. These molecules drift across the synapse and bind to receptors on the receiving neuron, triggering a new electrical signal. Different neurotransmitters play different roles in memory. Acetylcholine is crucial for encoding new memories. Dopamine helps determine what gets remembered by tagging important experiences with feelings of reward or significance. Serotonin influences memory consolidation. Norepinephrine affects how strongly emotional memories are encoded. As you age, the production and regulation of all these neurotransmitters gradually decline. Your brain makes less acetylcholine. The receptors for dopamine become less sensitive. The balance between different neurotransmitter systems shifts. These aren't catastrophic changes. They're subtle shifts in chemical concentrations, in receptor sensitivity, in the efficiency of reuptake and recycling. But they add up. The result is that the chemical signals involved in memory, they become less sharp, less precise. The signal-to-noise ratio decreases. Information still gets transmitted, but with slightly less fidelity. Memories still form, but with less clarity. Retrieval still happens, but with more effort. You experience this as memories that aren't quite as vivid as they used to be, as having the sense that you know something but can't quite access it, as information that takes longer to come to mind than it used to. The memory is there. The connections exist. But the chemical efficiency that makes retrieval feel effortless, that has diminished. Now let's talk about something called oxidative stress. This is one of the fundamental mechanisms of aging at the cellular level, and it affects memory systems particularly strongly. Your brain uses enormous amounts of energy. Neurons are constantly firing, synapses are constantly transmitting signals. Cellular machinery is constantly working to maintain the elaborate structures that enable thought and memory. All of this requires oxygen, which is used in your mitochondria to generate ATP, the energy currency of cells. But using oxygen creates a byproduct. Free radicals. These are highly reactive molecules that can damage cellular components. Proteins, lipids, DNA, all of them are vulnerable to oxidative damage. Your cells have defense systems against this. Antioxidants, repair enzymes, mechanisms to clear out damaged components. But these systems aren't perfect. Over decades, some oxidative damage accumulates. In neurons, this accumulated damage affects everything involved in memory. Damaged proteins in synapses make them less efficient. Oxidative damage to cellular membranes affects how well neurotransmitters are released and received. Damage to mitochondria reduces the energy available for the intensive processes of memory formation and maintenance. None of this happens overnight. This is damage accumulating over years and decades. Your cellular repair systems are constantly working to fix what they can, but they can't fix everything. Some damage persists. And the accumulation of this persistent damage contributes to the gradual decline in memory function. You don't experience oxidative stress directly. You can't feel free radicals damaging your neurons, but you experience the cumulative effects. The slight increase in mental fatigue, the feeling that sustained concentration takes more effort than it used to, the sense that your brain doesn't quite have the same endurance it had when you were younger. Let's shift to something structural. The physical architecture of your brain. Your brain is composed of two types of tissue: grey matter, which contains the cell bodies of neurons, and white matter, which contains the axons that connect different brain regions. Both change with age, but in different ways. Grey matter volume peaks in your early 20s and then begins a slow decline. You lose neurons, not dramatically, not in most brain regions, but measurably. The hippocampus, crucial for forming new memories, loses about 0.5% of its volume per year after age 30. By the time you're 70, it's noticeably smaller than it was at 20. This loss isn't random, it's concentrated in regions that are metabolically demanding, regions that require constant energy and maintenance, regions like the hippocampus that are involved in forming new memories rather than storing old ones. The stored memories distributed across your cortex, they're more stable, less vulnerable to age-related neuron loss. White matter shows different changes. The myelin sheaths that insulate axons, making neural signals travel faster, they begin to degrade. This process starts in middle age and accelerates as you get older. The degradation isn't uniform, it's concentrated in the frontal lobes, the regions involved in complex thinking, planning, and working memory. The result is a slowing of neural transmission. Signals still travel from one brain region to another, but they travel slightly slower. Complex thoughts that require coordination between multiple brain regions, they take longer to develop. Working memory, which depends on rapidly maintaining and manipulating information across distributed networks, becomes less efficient. You experience this as a general slowing of mental processing. It takes you slightly longer to understand complex ideas. slightly longer to formulate responses, slightly longer to shift between different tasks. This isn't because you're less intelligent. Your knowledge is intact. Your reasoning abilities are preserved. But the speed at which your brain can process and integrate information, that has decreased. There's another change worth understanding, something called hippocampal neurogenesis. For most of the 20th century, scientists believed that you were born with all the neurons you'd ever have, that no new neurons formed in the adult brain. This turned out to be wrong. The hippocampus, that crucial region for forming new memories, it continues to generate new neurons throughout life. But the rate of this neurogenesis declines with age. When you're young, thousands of new neurons are being born in your hippocampus every day. These new neurons integrate into existing memory circuits and actually enhance your ability to form distinct separable memories. They help you encode new experiences without interfering with old memories. As you age, the rate of neurogenesis slows. Fewer new neurons are being added to your hippocampus. The ones that do form might not integrate as well into existing circuits. This contributes to memory decline in specific ways. It becomes harder to form memories that are distinct from similar memories. You might confuse where you parked today with where you parked yesterday. You might blend together multiple similar conversations into one confused memory. This isn't catastrophic. Your hippocampus still functions, new neurons are still being formed just at a slower rate. But the reduced neurogenesis is one more factor contributing to the overall change in how memory works as you age. Now let's talk about something that might surprise you. Something called the default mode network. Your brain isn't a passive organ that only activates when you're actively thinking or remembering. Even when you're at rest, when you're not focused on any particular task, certain brain regions remain highly active. These regions, connected in what's called the default mode network, they're involved in self-reflection, in thinking about the past and future, in maintaining your sense of continuity as a person. And here's what's interesting. The default mode network is particularly active when you're forming and consolidating memories, when you're reminiscing, when you're integrating new experiences with existing knowledge, when you're creating the narrative of your life. These are all functions of the default mode network. In older brains, the default mode network changes. It becomes less synchronized. The different regions that should be working together become less tightly coordinated. This affects several aspects of memory. Your ability to integrate new information with existing knowledge decreases slightly. Your capacity for the kind of spontaneous reminiscence that brings past memories to mind becomes less frequent. The sense of your life as a continuous narrative, it might feel less vivid. But interestingly, the default mode network's role in maintaining your sense of self, in preserving core identity and long-term memories of who you are, that remains relatively stable. So you might forget what you did yesterday, but you remember who you are. You might not recall recent conversations, but you remember the major events and relationships that define your life. This selective preservation is important. It suggests that even as memory systems age, they are maintaining the functions that matter most for preserving your identity and coherence as a person. The details fade more easily, but the meaning, the core sense of self, that's more resistant to age-related change. Let's turn to something you might have noticed about when you forget things most often. Times of day, energy levels, how well you slept the night before. Memory performance isn't constant throughout the day. It fluctuates based on your circadian rhythms, your energy levels, how much sleep you've had. These fluctuations affect everyone, but they become more pronounced with age. When you're young, your brain has substantial metabolic reserves. You can function reasonably well even when tired, even when you haven't slept enough, even at suboptimal times of day. The robust cellular machinery and abundant energy production compensate for less than ideal conditions. As you age, those reserves decrease. Your brain becomes more sensitive to factors that affect its performance. Poor sleep has a bigger impact on memory. Trying to remember things when you're tired becomes significantly harder. Times of day when your circadian rhythms are at low points, your memory works noticeably less well. This isn't a sign of pathology. It's a sign that your brain, like any aging system, has less tolerance for suboptimal conditions. A young car engine might run fine even when it's overdue for an oil change. An older engine needs proper maintenance and ideal conditions to run smoothly. Your brain is similar. You experience this as increased variability in memory performance. Some days your memory seems fine, sharp, reliable, functioning well. Other days, especially when you're tired or stressed or not sleeping well, it feels significantly impaired. This day-to-day variability, more than any single bad day, might be what convinces you that something is wrong. But it's not wrong. It's your brain telling you what it needs. More sleep, better sleep, adequate rest between demanding tasks, attention to the times of day when you function best. Your memory hasn't failed, it's just become more dependent on optimal conditions to function at its best. There's another biological factor we need to discuss. Inflammation. Inflammation is part of your immune system. It's how your body responds to injury and infection. In acute form, inflammation is protective. It helps fight pathogens and promote healing. But chronic low-level inflammation, the kind that can develop with age, is a different story. As you get older, your body often develops what scientists call inflammaging, a persistent low-grade inflammatory state that affects multiple systems, including your brain. This inflammation affects neurons and synapses in ways that impair memory function. Inflammatory molecules can interfere with synaptic plasticity. They can reduce the efficiency of neurotransmitter systems. They can promote the accumulation of proteins that interfere with cellular function. They can even affect the blood-brain barrier, making it more permeable and allowing potentially harmful substances to reach brain tissue. Not everyone develops the same level of chronic inflammation. It's affected by diet, exercise, stress, sleep, genetics, and various health conditions, but to some degree age-related inflammation affects most people. And for those affected, it contributes to the changes in memory that come with aging. You might not think you experience inflammation in your brain, but you might notice that your memory works better when you're healthier, when you're less stressed, when you're taking care of yourself, and worse when you're dealing with illness, chronic stress, poor sleep, or other factors that promote inflammation. This connection between overall health and memory function is not just correlation, it's causation. The state of your body affects the state of your brain. The health of your cardiovascular system influences brain health. The quality of your sleep affects memory consolidation. Your stress levels impact hippocampal function. It's all connected. Now let's talk about something called cognitive reserve. This is the brain's ability to compensate for age-related changes, to maintain function despite accumulating damage. Imagine two people, both 70 years old, both with similar amounts of age-related brain changes, same amount of hippocampal shrinkage, same degree of white matter degradation, same levels of neurotransmitter decline. But one of them shows significant memory problems while the other functions well. Why? The answer is cognitive reserve. The person who functions well despite brain changes, they've built up reserve capacity. This reserve comes from education, from mentally stimulating work, from engaging in complex cognitive activities throughout life, from maintaining active social networks, from continuing to learn new things. This reserve works through multiple mechanisms. People with high cognitive reserve might have more synaptic connections to begin with, so they can afford to lose more before function is noticeably impaired. They might have more efficient neural networks, able to accomplish tasks with less neural activation. They might be better at recruiting alternative brain regions when primary regions become less efficient. The important thing to understand is that cognitive reserve isn't fixed. It's not something you either have or don't have based on your early life. It can be built throughout your lifetime. Every time you learn something new, every time you engage in mentally challenging activities, every time you have rich social interactions, you're potentially building reserve that will help your brain maintain function despite age-related changes. You can't see cognitive reserve, can't measure it directly, but you can see its effects. People with more education tend to show memory problems later than those with less education, even with the same amount of brain pathology. People who stay mentally active show slower cognitive decline. People who maintain social connections preserve memory function better than those who become isolated. This isn't about preventing aging. You can't stop your hippocampus from shrinking or your white matter from degrading, but you can potentially offset the functional effects of these changes by building and maintaining cognitive reserve. Your brain's ability to compensate, to adapt, to find alternative pathways when primary pathways become less efficient, that can be enhanced throughout your life. Let's pause here for a moment. Let's acknowledge what we've covered. The proteins and genes and neurotransmitters, the oxidative stress and inflammation, the structural changes in grey matter and white matter, the decline in neurogenesis, the changes in default mode network function, the increased sensitivity to sleep and energy levels, the potential for cognitive reserve to compensate. This is a lot of biology, a lot of mechanisms, and you might be thinking, this just confirms that everything is degrading, that my brain is aging in dozens of different ways simultaneously. And yes, that's true. Your brain is aging. The changes are real, multiple, and measurable. But here's what's also true. Despite all of these changes, despite the accumulated effects of decades of cellular aging, your brain is still functioning. You're still forming new memories, still maintaining old ones, still able to think, reason, learn, remember. The 30-year plan has been exceeded by 40 or 50 years. The cellular machinery was never meant to run this long, and yet it does. Not perfectly, not as efficiently as when it was new, but remarkably, given the circumstances. And understanding these biological mechanisms, knowing what's actually happening at the cellular level, it changes the emotional weight of forgetting. It's not personal failure. It's not moral weakness. It's not evidence that you're broken. It's biology. It's the inevitable result of physical processes playing out over decades in tissue that was never designed to last this long. Your forgetting has causes, physical, measurable causes. And while you can't reverse cellular aging, can't stop the gradual accumulation of oxidative damage, or the slow decline in neurotransmitter production, you can understand it, can make peace with it, can stop adding judgment and fear on top of the biological reality. There's something almost beautiful in this. The fact that we can look inside the black box of memory, can identify the specific molecules and structures and processes that enable you to remember. That's profound. It demystifies, makes the invisible visible, transforms a frightening unknown into a knowable, comprehensible reality. Your memory is changing because your neurons are aging, your synapses are becoming less efficient, your neurotransmitter systems are declining, your cellular machinery is accumulating decades of use. This isn't a mystery, this isn't a curse, this is biology running its course in a body that has lived longer than evolution optimized for. And in the next part, we'll explore what this means in practice, how these biological changes manifest in your daily experience, the specific patterns of what you forget and what you remember, the difference between normal age-related memory changes and the pathological changes that might actually signal disease. But for now, rest with this understanding. Your brain is a physical organ, your memories are physical structures, and the changes you're experiencing, they have physical causes. This doesn't make them less real or less challenging, but it does make them less mysterious, less frightening, more understandable. You're aging, your brain is aging, and every one of the billions of people who have lived long enough to grow old has experienced the same thing. The same cellular changes, the same molecular decline, the same reorganization of memory systems optimized for a shorter lifespan. You're not alone in this. You're not uniquely broken. You're just human, aging, experiencing what every aging brain experiences. And now you know why. Now you understand the machinery beneath the experience, the biology beneath the forgetting. That's progress. That's a foundation. In the next part, we'll build on it. We'll look at what these changes mean in practice, how they show up in your daily life, and most importantly, how to distinguish between changes that are normal and accepted versus changes that might signal something more serious that requires attention. Sleep if you need to, listen if you can. The biology is settled now, the foundation is laid. What comes next is bringing this understanding into the lived reality of memory in an aging brain. Your memory is changing, you know why now, you understand the mechanisms, the proteins, the synapses, the cellular processes. It's not a mystery, it's biology. And biology, unlike fear or judgment, can be understood, can be made sense of, can be accepted as the natural consequence of living longer than your brain was designed to accommodate. Rest in that. Let that settle. The details are there if you want them. The understanding is available. But the core message is simple. Your forgetting has causes, physical causes, not personal failings, not random deterioration. Specific, identifiable biological processes that follow predictable patterns. That's enough for now. That's the biology. What comes next is the experience. How all of this cellular change manifests in the moments when you walk into a room and forget why you're there, when you can't recall a name, when a word hovers just out of reach. We'll get there, one part at a time, building understanding piece by piece, until the full picture emerges and a memory, in all its complexity and imperfection, makes sense. As this evolved, something else was happening. Something you might have noticed in your own experience. You don't forget everything equally. Memory doesn't decline uniformly across all types of information, all types of experiences, all domains of knowledge. There's a pattern to what fades and what remains, and understanding that pattern might help you make sense of your own experience. Let's start with names, because almost everyone over 40 complains about forgetting names. Meeting someone you know, someone you've met multiple times, and having their name completely escape you. Standing there with the knowledge that you know this person, that you've talked with them before but unable to produce their name no matter how hard you try. This is one of the most common memory complaints of aging, and there are specific reasons why names are particularly vulnerable. Names are arbitrary labels. There's no inherent connection between the name Jennifer and the person who bears it. Unlike faces, which carry information about age and emotion and familiarity, names are just sounds attached to people by convention. Your brain has to create an association between the face, the personality, the context where you know this person, and the arbitrary sound sequence that serves as their label. This association is maintained by the same synaptic connections we discussed earlier. And these connections, especially the ones formed more recently in your adult life, they're exactly the type that becomes less reliable as your brain ages. The retrieval pathway from face I recognize to name associated with this face becomes slower, less automatic, sometimes completely blocked. But here's what's interesting. You still know you know the person. You can often remember where you met them, what they do, how you feel about them. It's specifically the name, that arbitrary label, that escapes you. This tells us something important. The problem isn't that the memory is gone, it's that retrieval, particularly retrieval of arbitrary labels, becomes less efficient. And it gets worse if you're stressed or tired, if you feel anxious about forgetting, because the effort of trying to remember, the emotional reaction to not remembering, these activate stress responses that actually make retrieval harder. You get caught in a loop. Can't remember, feel stressed about not remembering. Stress makes it harder to remember, which increases stress. The name is there, the memory exists, but the retrieval pathway is temporarily blocked by the combination of age-related changes and stress-induced interference. And often, hours later, when you've stopped trying, when you're relaxed and not thinking about it, the name pops into your mind effortlessly. Because the stress has passed and the slower retrieval pathway has finally brought the information to consciousness. Let's contrast this with a different type of memory. Skills, things you've learned to do through practice, playing an instrument, cooking, driving, professional skills you've developed over decades. These procedural memories, these knowing how to do things memories, they're remarkably stable in aging. You don't forget how to ride a bike. Don't forget how to type. Don't forget the fundamental skills of your profession, even if you retire and don't practice them for years. This is because procedural memory is stored differently than episodic memory. It doesn't rely as heavily on the hippocampus, which is vulnerable to aging. Instead, it's stored in motor cortex, in the basal ganglia, in cerebellum. These regions show less dramatic age-related change. The connections are maintained more robustly. The retrieval pathways remain more reliable. So you can lose names easily, but remember complex skills perfectly. You can forget what you had for breakfast, but remember how to play songs you learned 40 years ago. The pattern of what's preserved and what declines, it maps onto the underlying brain architecture and which regions age faster or slower. There's another pattern worth understanding. The difference between remembering that something happened versus remembering when it happened. You might have vivid memory of a conversation with a friend. You can recall what was said, how it felt, what it meant to you, but you can't remember if it happened last week or last month. The content is preserved, but the temporal context is fuzzy. Or you remember a trip you took, the places you visited, the experiences you had, but the order of events has become scrambled. You can't quite reconstruct the sequence of what happened when. This is because temporal context, the when of memory, is particularly dependent on the hippocampus. And as the hippocampus ages, temporal markers fade more easily than the content of memories. You end up with experiences floating in your memory without clear timestamps. The what remains clearer than the when. This can be disconcerting, makes it harder to construct a clear narrative of your recent past. But it doesn't mean the memories themselves are lost. Just that their organization in time, their sequence and spacing has become less precise. The meaning is preserved even as the temporal structure loosens. Now let's talk about something called source memory. The ability to remember not just what you know, but where you learned it. You might remember a fact, but not remember where you heard it. Know that something is true, but not recall if you read it in a book, or heard it in a conversation, or saw it on television. This distinction between content and source, it degrades with age, faster than memory for content alone. Young people generally remember both what they learned and the context of learning it. Older people often remember what they learned, but the source has become detached. The information remains accessible, but its provenance has faded. This has interesting effects. It can make older adults more susceptible to false information because they might remember hearing something without remembering that the source was unreliable. It can lead to accidentally claiming others' ideas as your own, because you remember the idea but not that someone else said it first. It can make it harder to evaluate the reliability of your own knowledge because the markers of where it came from are missing, but it doesn't mean the knowledge itself is wrong or unreliable. Just that the metadata, the information about information, declines faster than the information itself. You know things, you just don't always remember how you came to know them. Let's shift to something you've probably noticed. The difference between remembering things from long ago versus things from recently. There's a phenomenon called the reminiscence bump. When older adults are asked to recall memories from their entire life, they show a strong peak in memories from roughly ages 15 to 30. More memories from those years than from any other period, and fewer memories relatively from recent decades. Part of this is just arithmetic. Your teens and 20s are when you experience the most novelty. First love, first job, first time living independently, first major life decisions. Novelty creates strong memories. So it makes sense that you'd have more memories from a period when everything was new. But there's more to it than that. The memories you formed in your teens and 20s, they were formed by a brain at peak memory capacity, encoded by a hippocampus operating at maximum efficiency, strengthened by synapses that were robust and plastic. These memories have endured because they were laid down so strongly to begin with. The memories you're forming now at 60 or 70, they're being encoded by a less efficient system. The synaptic changes are weaker. The consolidation is less complete. So even if today's experiences are meaningful and significant, the memories of them might not last as long as memories from your youth did. This creates a strange effect. The past, especially the distant past, can feel more vivid and real than the recent past. You can remember your wedding day 40 years ago with crystal clarity, but can't remember what you did last Tuesday. This isn't because your current life is less meaningful. It's because the memories of it are being stored less durably. And this contributes to a common experience of aging, the sense that time is accelerating, that years are passing without leaving much trace. Part of this is psychological, the proportion effect where a year represents a smaller fraction of your total life as you age. But part of it is neurological. You're forming fewer retrievable memories of recent experiences, so those experiences feel less substantial in retrospect. Time seems to pass quickly because you can't reconstruct it clearly in memory. There's another pattern that shows up in what older adults forget versus what they remember. Emotional content. Older adults tend to remember positive information better than negative information. This is called the positivity effect. When shown a series of images, some positive, some negative, some neutral, older adults later remember the positive images best. Young adults don't show this bias. They remember negative and positive roughly equally. This might be an adaptive shift. As you age, as your remaining time becomes more limited, your brain might be prioritizing memories that are emotionally positive, preserving experiences of joy, connection, beauty, meaning, allowing negative experiences to fade more readily. This isn't conscious. You're not choosing to remember good things and forget bad things, but at the level of encoding and consolidation, there seems to be a bias emerging. The effect is subtle. You still remember negative events if they're significant enough. But for everyday experiences, for minor frustrations and disappointments, the positive tends to persist while the negative fades faster. This might contribute to the impression that the past was better than it was, not because it actually was better, but because your memory is now filtering it to emphasize the positive. Some researchers think this positivity effect is actually predictive, that it helps maintain psychological well-being in the face of age-related losses and challenges. Your memory is literally helping you focus on what was good, what was meaningful, what brought joy, while letting go of what doesn't serve you anymore. Now let's talk about something called prospective memory. Remembering to remember. Remembering to do things in the future. You need to take medication at a certain time. Need to make a phone call later today. Need to buy something the next time you're at the store. These are prospective memories. Intentions about the future that you need to hold in mind and execute at the right moment. Older adults often struggle with prospective memory more than other types. Forget to take medication, forget appointments, forget to complete tasks they intended to do. This is partly because prospective memory requires active maintenance of information in working memory, and working memory capacity declines with age. You're trying to hold on to a future intention while dealing with present demands. The limited capacity of aging working memory makes this harder. But there's a paradox. Older adults actually do better on prospective memory tasks when they can use external aids. Calendars, reminders, routines, written notes. These external scaffolds compensate for reduced internal capacity. So while the underlying ability declines, the practical impact can be minimized through compensatory strategies. The key is recognizing that you need these strategies. Young people can often get away with just remembering things internally. Older adults who try to do the same will forget more often. But older adults who accept that they need external aids and systematically use them can maintain reliable prospective memory despite the underlying neural changes. This is adaptation. Recognizing the limits of your changing memory and building support systems that work with those limits rather than fighting against them. It's not admitting defeat. It's being practical about the reality of aging memory systems. Let's look at one more pattern, the difference between recognition and recall. Recall is generating information from memory without cues. Someone asks you a question and you need to produce the answer from your own memory. Recognition is identifying information when you encounter it. Multiple choice rather than fill in the blank. Older adults show more decline in recall than in recognition. You might not be able to produce someone's name when you're trying to think of it. But if someone mentions the name, you immediately recognize it as correct. The information is there, it's stored. but generating it without cues is harder than recognizing it when you encounter it. This is because recall requires more active searching through memory networks, requires generating multiple possibilities and evaluating them, requires more robust activation of retrieval pathways. Recognition just requires matching current input to stored patterns, which is less demanding. So you experience situations where you can't recall something, but you know you'll recognize it when you see it. Can't produce a name, but will know it when you hear it. Can't remember the details of an event, but will recognize photos from it. Your memory isn't gone. The retrieval pathways for recall have weakened while recognition remains more intact. This is why multiple choice tests are easier than essay tests. Why you do better in conversations where others provide context than in conversations where you're expected to generate information unprompted. Why you can follow along with information better than you can produce it from scratch. Understanding this distinction can help you structure situations to work with your memory rather than against it. If you're trying to remember something, giving yourself cues helps. If you're trying to explain something to someone else, having notes or outlines to prompt you makes it easier. If you're in a conversation, asking questions that provide context helps you retrieve relevant information. All of these patterns, the ones we've discussed, and others you might have noticed yourself, they are not random. They reflect the underlying biology we explored earlier. Hippocampal-dependent memories decline faster because the hippocampus ages more than other regions. Retrieval-intensive memories fade faster because retrieval pathways are more vulnerable to age-related changes. Recent memories are weaker than old memories because they were encoded by a less efficient system. And understanding these patterns, recognizing them in your own experience, it can shift your relationship with forgetting. Instead of seeing every forgotten name or misplaced memory as evidence of general decline, you can recognize it as part of a specific pattern. A pattern that makes sense given what's happening in your brain. A pattern that millions of aging people share. You're not uniquely impaired. You're experiencing the predictable consequences of specific neurological changes. And those consequences, while real and sometimes frustrating, they're also selective. They affect certain types of memory more than others. Leave certain capacities intact while changing others. Create a different memory profile rather than simply a worse one. Let's talk about one more aspect of this. Something called meta-memory. Your awareness of your own memory abilities. Your judgment about what you will and won't remember. Young people often overestimate their memory, think they'll remember something when they won't. Don't bother writing things down because they're confident they'll remember. And often they do remember, so their confidence seems justified. Older adults often underestimate their memory, think they won't remember things that they actually will, write everything down because they don't trust their memory, and this lack of confidence can become self-fulfilling. If you don't trust your memory, you don't practice retrieval, and your memory becomes less reliable because you're not exercising it. But here's what's interesting. Older adults' calibration, their ability to accurately judge what they will and won't remember, it's often better than young adults. They have more accurate meta-memory, they know their limits, they can predict more accurately which things they'll remember and which they'll forget. This is actually valuable. If you know you won't remember something, you can write it down or set a reminder. If you know you will remember, you can trust that knowledge. Accurate meta-memory helps you compensate effectively for memory limitations. It's a form of wisdom about your own cognitive capacities. So while your memory might be less reliable than it used to be, your understanding of your memory is actually better. You've learnt through experience what you can and can't count on. And that knowledge, that metacognitive awareness, it's a resource that helps you navigate the reality of your changing memory. Think about your own experience for a moment. The times you've forgotten things, are there patterns? Do you forget certain types of information more than others? Do you forget more when you're tired or stressed? Do you remember better when you have external cues, when you're not feeling pressured to perform? These patterns, they're information. They're teaching you about your specific memory profile, what works for you and what doesn't, what you can rely on and what you need to support with external aids. What conditions help you remember and what conditions make forgetting more likely? And paying attention to these patterns, rather than just feeling bad about forgetting, that's adaptive. That's your brain teaching you how to work with it as it ages, showing you what it can still do reliably and what it needs help with. This is valuable knowledge if you choose to use it. The night is deepening. You've been lying here for a while now, listening to details about memory patterns, about what fades and what remains, about the specific ways that forgetting manifests as brains age. And maybe some of what you've heard resonates with your own experience. The forgotten names, the fuzzy temporal context, the vivid old memories and vague recent ones. You're not alone in this. Every aging person experiences these patterns. They're not signs of unique pathology. They're the normal, expected, predictable consequences of brain aging. Consequences that follow from the biology we discussed earlier. Consequences that make sense when you understand the underlying mechanisms. And in the next part, we'll bring all of this into modern life. We'll look at what these changes mean for your daily experience. How they show up in the moments when you walk into rooms and forget why, when you can't find your keys, when words escape you mid-sentence. And crucially, we'll explore how to distinguish between normal age-related changes and patterns that might signal something more serious. But for now, rest with this understanding. Your forgetting follows patterns. Specific patterns. Patterns that reflect how your brain is changing. You're not randomly deteriorating. You're changing in ways that make sense, that can be predicted, that millions of others are experiencing simultaneously. That knowledge doesn't stop the forgetting, but it might stop the fear, might reduce the judgment, might help you see your changing memory as a comprehensible phenomenon rather than a mysterious threat. Your memory is reorganizing, shifting priorities, changing how it operates based on neural changes that are part of normal aging. This is biology. This is neuroscience. This is the expected trajectory for a brain that has exceeded its evolutionary design parameters. You can make peace with that, can stop fighting it, can start working with it instead of against it. And that shift from resistance to acceptance, from fear to understanding, it might not change your memory, but it can change your relationship with your memory. And that changes everything. So breathe. Let these patterns settle into awareness. Let the understanding that you're experiencing normal aging, not pathological decline, let that reduce the anxiety just a bit. Just enough to rest, just enough to stop judging yourself for being exactly what you are, a human with an aging brain, doing the best it can with architecture never designed for this longer lifespan. That's normal, that's expected, that's shared by everyone who lives long enough to experience it. You're not broken, you're just old enough to notice that your brain is aging. And now you understand how and why. And that understanding is the foundation for everything that comes next. You've probably experienced this, walking from one room to another with a clear purpose in mind. And the moment you cross the threshold, the purpose vanishes. You're standing there looking around with absolutely no memory of what brought you here. You can feel that you came here for a reason. You can sense that it was important just seconds ago, but the actual content of that intention has completely evaporated. This is one of the most common, most frustrating experiences of age-related memory change, and it has a specific explanation that connects to everything we've discussed so far. Your working memory, the system that holds information active while you're using it, has limited capacity that decreases with age. When you form the intention to get something from another room, that intention needs to be held in working memory. But if something distracts you during the walk, even briefly, or if your attention shifts to navigating through space, the limited capacity of your working memory can't maintain the intention alongside other cognitive demands. The threshold effect, the fact that forgetting happens specifically when you cross from one room to another, it's real. It's called the doorway effect. Moving through a doorway creates an event boundary in your mind, a signal that one context has ended and another has begun. And your brain, always trying to manage limited resources efficiently, sometimes uses these event boundaries to clear working memory. to make room for whatever's coming next. For young people with robust working memory, this clearing process preserves important information. The intention survives the transition. But for older adults with reduced working memory capacity, the intention can get cleared along with everything else, not because it wasn't important, but because the system for maintaining it through transitions has become less reliable. You experience this as sudden, complete forgetting. One moment you know exactly what you're doing, the next moment, nothing. And often, the harder you try to remember, the more elusive it becomes. Because the effortful retrieval process activates stress responses that interfere with the very memory systems you're trying to access. The solution, if there is one, is to retrace your steps. Go back to where you were when you formed the intention. Return to the original context. And often, remarkably often, the intention comes back because memory is context dependent. The cues from the original location can reactivate the neural pattern that held the intention, making it accessible again. This isn't pathology. This is normal age-related working memory limitation combined with how the event boundaries affect memory processing. It's frustrating. It's common. But it's not a sign that something is seriously wrong. Let's look at another daily scenario. You're in a conversation. You're following along perfectly. And suddenly you realize you haven't heard the last few sentences. You were physically present, ears working fine, but somehow your attention drifted and the information just didn't register. You have to ask the person to repeat themselves, feeling embarrassed that you weren't paying attention. This is attention lapse, and it becomes more common with age for specific reasons. Your brain's ability to sustain attention over time, to resist distraction, to maintain focus on a single stream of information, it all depends on frontal lobe function. And the frontal lobes, particularly their white matter connections, they show significant age-related change. The result is that sustained attention becomes harder to maintain. You can focus, you can pay attention. But maintaining that focus for extended periods without lapses requires more effort than it used to. And if you're tired, or if the conversation isn't particularly engaging, or if there are other things on your mind, attention lapses happen. You're not hearing less. You're not having trouble understanding language. Your attention is just more vulnerable to disruption. And when attention lapses, information doesn't get encoded into memory. You can't remember what was said because it never fully registered in the first place. This is called an encoding failure. It's different from forgetting something you once knew. You never encoded it to begin with. And this type of memory problem, it increases with age because the attentional systems that support encoding become less reliable. The practical implication is that you might need to be more intentional about attention, deliberately focusing, removing distractions, taking notes, asking for important information to be repeated. These aren't signs of weakness. They're adaptations to the reality that automatic attention, the kind that just happens without effort, becomes less reliable as frontal lobes age. Here's another scenario you've probably encountered. You're looking for your keys, or your phone, or your glasses. You know you had them recently. You can remember using them, but you have no idea where you put them down. You search everywhere, becoming increasingly frustrated, sometimes finding them in places that make no sense. This is prospective memory failure combined with inattentive action. You put the keys down while thinking about something else. The action of putting them down wasn't encoded into memory because your attention was elsewhere, so there's no memory to retrieve. The information was never stored in the first place. This happens to everyone sometimes, but it happens more often to older adults because the divided attention required to do one thing while thinking about another, that becomes harder. Young people can put keys down while thinking about something else and still encode the location. Older adults are more likely to complete the action automatically without it registering in memory. The solution is the same as for attention lapses. Be more intentional, create habits. Always put keys in the same place. Put glasses in designated spots. Use phone cases with distinctive colours or sounds. Create external structures that reduce reliance on memory for these routine actions. This isn't admitting defeat. It's recognizing that automatic encoding becomes less reliable and compensating accordingly. You're working with your brain as it is, rather than insisting it work as it used to. Now let's talk about something that might worry you more. Repeating yourself in conversation, telling the same story multiple times to the same person, asking questions you have already asked. This happens because you don't remember having the conversation before. The first conversation wasn't encoded strongly enough to create a durable memory. Or it was encoded but the memory has faded. So when the topic comes up again, you respond as if it's new information you're sharing, not recognizing that you've already had this exact conversation. The person you're talking to remembers because for them it was a single conversation that got encoded normally. But for you, each instance feels fresh because there's no strong memory of the previous instances. This discrepancy between your experience and the other person's experience, it can be embarrassing and concerning. But it's not necessarily pathological. Older adults often don't encode routine social conversations strongly. The hippocampus, already working less efficiently, prioritizes information that seems significant. A casual conversation might not reach that threshold, so it doesn't get stored durably, and the next time the same topic arises, there's no memory blocking you from responding as if it's new. The key is frequency and pattern. Occasional repetition in conversation, that's normal age-related memory change. Constant repetition, where you tell the same story multiple times in a single conversation, where you ask the same question minutes after it was answered, that's different. That might signal something beyond normal aging. We'll come back to this distinction. Let's shift to something else you might have noticed. Difficulty learning new technology, new apps, new devices, new software. Things that younger people seem to pick up effortlessly feel overwhelmingly complex to you. This is partly about processing speed and working memory. Learning new technology requires holding multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously. Understanding the logic of a new interface while remembering the steps you've just taken while planning what to try next. This places heavy demands on working memory and processing speed, both of which have declined with age. But there's another factor. Your expertise in older technology can actually interfere. You have deeply ingrained patterns for how things should work based on decades of using earlier systems. When new technology works differently, you have to overcome these existing patterns, which requires cognitive flexibility that becomes harder with age. So you're fighting both reduced capacity for learning and increased interference from existing knowledge. The combination makes learning new technology genuinely harder, not just perceived as harder. This isn't about intelligence. It's about the specific cognitive resources required for this type of learning and how those resources change with age. The practical solution is to allow more time, more repetition, more deliberate practice than you needed when you were younger. To accept that learning will take longer and require more effort, and to recognize that this difficulty doesn't mean you can't learn, just the process is slower and more demanding than it used to be. Now we need to talk about something important, the line between normal age-related memory change and pathological memory decline. Because this is probably what worries you most. The question of whether what you're experiencing is normal or the beginning of dementia. Let's be clear about some things. Normal age-related memory change follows the patterns we've been discussing. It's gradual. It's primarily about processing speed and efficiency rather than lost knowledge. It's more about forgetting recent things than forgetting long-established information. It's frustrating but doesn't significantly impair your ability to live independently. Pathological memory decline looks different. It's more rapid in its progression. It affects older, well-established memories in addition to new ones. It impairs your ability to function independently. It involves getting lost in familiar places. Forgetting not just names, but who people are. Forgetting not just recent events, but the fact that events happened at all. The specific patterns matter. If you can't remember where you put your keys, that's probably normal. If you can't remember what keys are for, that's not normal. If you forget a friend's name but remember who they are in your relationship, that's probably normal. If you forget that you have this friend at all, that's not normal. If you occasionally repeat yourself in conversation, that's probably normal. If you tell the same story 3 times in 10 minutes, That's concerning. If you sometimes forget recent events, that's probably normal. If you forget major life events or can't form any new lasting memories, that's concerning. The rate of change matters too. Normal aging is gradual. Pathological decline is often more rapid. If your memory has been slowly changing over years, that suggests normal aging. If it has notably worsened over months, that warrants medical attention. Your ability to compensate matters. If you forget things but can use strategies to work around it, if you can use calendars and notes effectively, if you can still learn new information when you make the effort, that suggests normal aging. If compensatory strategies don't help, if you can't remember to use the tools that should help you remember, if you've completely lost the ability to form new lasting memories, that's concerning. Here's a general rule. If your memory problems worry you, but don't worry the people around you, it's probably normal aging. People with normal age-related change are often more aware of and concerned about their forgetting than their family members are. They notice every lapse and worry about what it means. People with pathological decline often show less insight into their problems. They might deny or minimize significant impairments. Their family members are usually more concerned than they are. This pattern, where others are worried but you're not, that's actually more concerning than the reverse. If you're lying here tonight worrying about your memory, if you're aware enough of the changes to be concerned about them, that awareness itself is a good sign. It suggests that your metacognition, your ability to monitor your own mental state, is intact, which is usually preserved in normal aging and often impaired in pathological decline. But concern isn't diagnosis. If you're worried, talk to your doctor, get evaluated. There are specific tests that can distinguish normal aging from pathological decline. Don't let fear keep you from seeking assessment, because even if there is something beyond normal aging, early detection allows for interventions that can help. Many things that look like memory problems aren't actually memory problems at all. Depression can cause memory complaints. Sleep disorders can impair memory. Medication side effects can affect cognition. Vitamin deficiencies, thyroid problems, chronic stress. All of these can impact memory in ways that are reversible when the underlying condition is addressed. So if you're concerned, get evaluated. But know that most people experiencing age-related memory changes, they're experiencing normal aging. Frustrating, yes. Concerning, perhaps, but not pathological. Not the beginning of dementia. Just the expected cognitive changes that come with living longer than your brain was designed to accommodate. Let's talk about something else. The social impact of memory changes. Because forgetting doesn't happen in isolation. It affects your relationships, your social interactions, your sense of competence in the world. You might avoid social situations because you're worried about forgetting names or repeating yourself. Might turn down invitations because social interactions feel more demanding than they used to. Might withdraw from activities you once enjoyed because you're self-conscious about your memory. This withdrawal is understandable, but it's also counterproductive. Because social engagement, staying connected, continuing to have rich interactions with others, these are protective for cognitive function. They maintain cognitive reserve. They keep memory systems active. They provide the kind of cognitive stimulation that helps preserve function. So the irony is that withdrawing due to memory concerns can actually accelerate cognitive decline, not dramatically, but measurably. Social isolation is a risk factor for cognitive impairment. Maintaining social connections is protective. This means that the appropriate response to memory changes isn't withdrawal, it's adaptation. Telling close friends that you might forget their names sometimes, and that's okay. Being open about needing people to repeat things. Using humour to diffuse the awkwardness of forgetting. Creating an environment where your memory lapses are accepted as normal rather than shameful. People who can maintain social engagement despite memory changes, who can be honest about their limitations without being paralysed by them, they preserve cognitive function better than those who withdraw. The social scaffolding supports memory in ways that trying to manage alone doesn't. Think about your own social patterns. Have you been withdrawing, Avoiding situations that used to bring you joy because you're worried about memory lapses? If so, consider whether that withdrawal is actually helping or whether it's creating a cycle where isolation leads to worse memory, which leads to more isolation. You don't have to perform perfectly, don't have to remember everything. Can let people know that your memory isn't what it used to be and that you might need patience. Most people are understanding. Most people have similar experiences or know they will as they age. The shame you feel about forgetting, that's often not matched by the judgment others are making. Let's look at one more daily scenario. Information overload. The sense that modern life demands too much memory, too much attention, too much cognitive processing for your aging brain to handle comfortably. And honestly, there's something to this. The amount of information you're expected to process, remember, track, it has increased dramatically. Passwords for dozens of accounts, multiple communication channels, constant notifications, rapid changes in technology and social norms. The cognitive demands of modern life have increased, while your cognitive capacity has decreased. This creates a squeeze. You're being asked to do more with less, and it's exhausting, leads to a constant sense of cognitive overload, of barely keeping up, of forgetting important things because there's simply too much to remember. This isn't just age-related decline. This is age-related decline colliding with societal demands that have increased. Your grandparents at your age didn't need to remember passwords or navigate smartphone interfaces or process the volume of information you're expected to manage. They had age-related memory changes too, but the environment made fewer demands on those changing systems. The solution is simplification where possible. Reduce the number of things you're trying to remember. Use password managers, turn off non-essential notifications, create routines that reduce cognitive load. Choose depth over breadth in your commitments and attention. You can't change your aging brain, but you can change the demands you place on it. Can structure your life to work with your actual capacities rather than the capacities you wish you had. This isn't giving up. It's being realistic about what your brain can handle and creating conditions for it to function well within those limits. As the night deepens, as you lie there processing all of this information about how memory changes play out in daily life, perhaps you can see your own experiences in what we've discussed. The doorway effect, the attention lapses, the misplaced objects, the repeated stories, the difficulty with new technology. These aren't mysterious, they're not random. They're the predictable consequences of specific neural changes we've explored. They follow patterns that make sense, and mostly, they're within the range of normal age-related change rather than pathological decline. That doesn't make them less frustrating, doesn't make them easy to accept, but it does make them comprehensible, makes them less frightening. Takes away some of the fear that maybe something is seriously wrong with you. You're aging. Your brain is aging. And the aging brain, it struggles with certain types of cognitive demands that a younger brain handles effortlessly. This is biology, this is neuroscience, this is normal. And in the next part, we'll explore what this means for how you live, what gifts might exist alongside the losses, what compensatory strengths might balance the declining capacities, what it means to age gracefully in a brain that's changing. But for now, rest in this understanding. Your daily memory struggles, they make sense, they fit patterns, they're shared by millions of aging people. You're not uniquely impaired, you're not broken, you're just experiencing what happens when a brain optimized for 30 years is asked to function for 70 or 80. That's a lot to ask, and it's remarkable that your brain does as well as it does under those circumstances. The forgetting is real, but so is the continued functioning, the adaptation, the compensation, the fact that despite all these changes, you're still here, still thinking, still remembering enough to be yourself. That's not failure, that's success under challenging circumstances. And understanding that, really understanding it, it might shift how you relate to your own memory, might reduce the judgment, might increase the compassion, might help you work with your brain as it is rather than fighting against the reality of aging. And that shift, that's what comes next. The possibility of making peace with memory that's changing. of finding meaning and even gifts in the process of aging, of accepting what is while still living fully within those constraints. We're almost there. One more part, one more section, and then you'll have the full picture. The biology, the patterns, the daily experience, and finally, the path toward acceptance and adaptation, toward living well with a memory that isn't what it used to be, but is still enough, still functional, still you. I know what you might be thinking. We've spent hours now exploring how memory declines with age, the biology of degradation, the patterns of forgetting, the daily struggles with names and misplaced objects and repeated stories. And you might be thinking, is there any good news here? Anyway, this isn't just a story of loss. And here's the thing. It's not just a story of loss. Because while some types of memory decline, others improve. While some capacities diminish, others deepen. The aging brain isn't just losing function, it's reorganizing, changing its priorities, trading certain abilities for others that might actually be more valuable in the later stages of life. Let's start with wisdom. That might sound abstract, even vague. But wisdom has a neuroscientific basis. It's the ability to see patterns across domains, to integrate different types of knowledge, to understand context and nuance, to make judgments that account for complexity. And wisdom, by most measures, increases with age. Older adults are better at seeing the bigger picture, better at understanding that most situations aren't black and white, better at drawing on diverse experiences to understand new situations, better at knowing what matters and what doesn't. This is partly because you've accumulated more experiences to draw from, more patterns to recognize, more context to compare new situations against. But it's also because your brain has reorganized to prioritize this type of integrative thinking, the detail-oriented memory of youth, the ability to rapidly encode new information, that declines. But the ability to see how new information fits into existing frameworks, to understand implications and connections, to grasp meaning, rather than just facts, that often improves. You might not remember the specific details of a news story you read yesterday, but you understand its significance better than a younger person would, can place it in historical context, can see patterns that someone without decades of experience would miss, can make judgments about what it means that are more sophisticated than someone whose memory is sharper, but whose integration is less developed. This is a real cognitive strength, one that doesn't show up on typical memory tests, because those tests measure detail recall, not wisdom. But in actual life, in making decisions, in understanding complex situations, in advising others, wisdom often matters more than rapid recall. Think about the time someone has come to you for advice. A younger colleague uncertain about a career decision. A friend struggling with a relationship. A family member facing a difficult choice. And you found yourself able to see nuances they couldn't see, could understand complexities they hadn't considered, could offer perspective that came from having lived through similar situations, having watched patterns play out over years and decades. That's wisdom. And it's not despite your aging memory. It's partly because of how your memory is reorganized, because your brain is now prioritizing meaning and pattern over detail, because you're integrating information across your entire life experience, rather than just encoding new facts rapidly. A young person might remember more details from a single conversation, but you can see how that conversation fits into a larger pattern of human behavior, can recognize the underlying dynamics because you've seen them before in different contexts with different people. Your memory for that specific conversation might fade quickly, but your understanding of what it means, that deepens. Let's talk about emotional regulation. Your ability to manage your emotions, to maintain equilibrium, to not be overwhelmed by feelings. Older adults, on average, report greater emotional well-being than younger adults. They are less likely to experience prolonged negative moods, less likely to be overwhelmed by stress, better at regulating their emotional responses to challenges. Part of this is life experience. You've been through difficult times before. You know you can survive them. You have perspective that younger people lack. But part of it is neurological. The aging brain shows changes in how it processes emotional information. The amygdala, which generates strong emotional responses, becomes less reactive with age. The prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotions, maintains its function even as other regions decline. The result is better emotional balance, less reactivity, more stability. You've probably noticed this in yourself. The things that would have sent you into spirals of anxiety at 30, they don't have the same power at 60. You can acknowledge difficulty without being consumed by it, can experience disappointment without catastrophizing, can face challenges with more equilibrium than you had when you were younger. This isn't because you care less. It's because your emotional regulation systems have matured. Your brain has learned through decades of experience and through neurological changes to maintain better balance, to not overreact, to preserve perspective even in difficulty. And there's that positivity effect we mentioned earlier. Your brain is literally biasing toward positive memories, toward positive interpretations, toward positive emotional experiences. This isn't denial. It's a shift in priorities. As time becomes more limited, as you become more aware of mortality, your brain starts filtering for what brings joy, meaning, connection. You might forget where you put your keys, but you remember, with clarity and warmth, moments of love with your partner, moments of connection with your children, experiences of beauty, of meaning, of joy. Your memory is prioritizing what matters emotionally while letting go of what doesn't. This is actually adaptive. It helps maintain well-being in the face of losses and limitations. It allows you to focus on what's meaningful rather than getting lost in frustration about what's declining. It's your brain's way of protecting your quality of life even as certain capacities diminish. Research shows that older adults, when asked to recall memories, spontaneously generate more positive memories than younger adults do. They are not avoiding negative memories consciously, but their memory systems are naturally emphasizing the positive, creating a life narrative that focuses on what brought joy, what created meaning, what fostered connection. This contributes to what researchers call the paradox of aging. Despite declining health, despite cognitive changes, despite losses and limitations, many older adults report higher life satisfaction than younger adults. They're not in denial about their limitations. They're just focusing their attention and their memory on what matters most. And that focus, partly biological, partly learned, it protects well-being in ways that sharp memory for every frustration never could. There's another gift that comes with age. Reduced self-consciousness, reduced concern about others' judgments, greater freedom to be yourself without worrying so much about how you're perceived. When you're young, the fear of social judgment is intense. Your brain is hyper-attuned to how others see you. You modify your behavior, your speech, your choices based on anticipated judgment. It's exhausting and limiting. As you age, this concern typically diminishes, partly because you've learned through experience that most people aren't judging you as harshly as you feared, partly because you care less about the judgments that do occur, partly because your brain, with its changing priorities, simply doesn't activate the same level of social anxiety it once did. This is freedom, real freedom. Freedom to speak your mind, to make choices based on what you want rather than what others expect, to be more authentic, more yourself, less constrained by fear of judgment. You might forget names, but you're more likely to say what you actually think, more likely to pursue what genuinely interests you rather than what you think you should be interested in, more likely to let go of activities or relationships that don't serve you. Your memory for social details has declined, but your freedom from social anxiety has increased. Think about the times you've said or done something that your younger self would have agonized over, worn something comfortable rather than fashionable, declined an invitation without elaborate excuses, expressed an opinion that might be unpopular, pursued a hobby that others might think is odd, and you did it without the paralyzing self-consciousness that would have stopped you at 30. So that's not recklessness. That's the freedom that comes with caring less about judgment, with having lived long enough to learn that others' opinions, while sometimes relevant, aren't worth the sacrifice of authenticity. Your changing memory might make social interactions harder in some ways, but the reduced anxiety makes them freer, more genuine, more enjoyable when you're not constantly monitoring yourself for possible missteps. Let's talk about creativity. Not the rapid, innovative creativity of youth, but a different kind. A creativity that comes from combining ideas in new ways based on vast accumulated knowledge. Older adults often show what researchers call integrative creativity, the ability to see connections between disparate domains, to combine ideas from different fields in novel ways, to create work that has depth and complexity that comes only from decades of accumulated experience. You might not come up with radically new ideas as quickly as you did at 25, but the ideas you do generate, they often have a richness, a depth, an integration of multiple perspectives that younger people can't achieve. You're drawing from a larger database of experiences, knowledge, patterns. Many creative people do their best work later in life, not because their memory is better, but because their ability to synthesize, to integrate, to see meaningful patterns has matured. The creativity of older age is different from the creativity of youth, but it's not inferior, just different, operating with different strengths. A young artist might create work that's technically innovative. An older artist creates work that's emotionally deep, that draws on a lifetime of observation and feeling. A young writer might craft clever plots. An older writer creates characters that feel real because they're drawn from decades of understanding human nature. A young thinker might have brilliant new ideas. An older thinker can see connections between fields that younger specialists miss. Your memory for recent details might be fading, but your ability to draw on everything you've ever learned, everything you've ever experienced, everything you've ever understood, that creates a foundation for creativity that youth can't match. You're working with a much larger palette, more colours to mix, more experiences to draw from, more patterns to recombine in novel ways. There's something else. Something about time perspective. When you're young, time feels infinite. The future stretches endlessly ahead. There's always time to do things later. This can lead to putting off what matters, assuming you'll get to it eventually. As you age, as time becomes more clearly finite, your relationship with time changes. You become more selective about how you spend it, more intentional about what you commit to, more focused on what actually matters to you rather than what you think you should do. This is sometimes called socio-emotional selectivity. As you age, you typically reduce the number of social relationships you maintain, but deepen the ones you keep. You become less interested in superficial connections and more invested in meaningful ones. Less interested in accumulating experiences and more interested in savouring the ones you have. Your memory might make it harder to remember everyone you've met. But that's okay because you're not trying to maintain relationships with everyone anymore. You're focusing on the relationships that matter most. And those relationships, because you're more selective and intentional, they're often richer than the scattered and numerous connections of youth. You spend less time on obligations that don't align with your values. Less time trying to please people whose opinions don't really matter to you. Less time on activities that don't bring genuine satisfaction. Your awareness of finite time makes you ruthless, in a good way, about how you spend it. This isn't giving up, it's prioritizing. It's your brain's changing capacities actually helping you focus on what matters most with the time you have remaining. The forgetting that makes it hard to maintain numerous connections is actually supporting a shift toward deeper, more meaningful relationships with fewer people. And there's a clarity that comes with this, a sense of knowing what matters and what doesn't, what's worth your time and what isn't, what brings meaning and what's just distraction. This clarity, this ability to distinguish essential from peripheral, is often sharper in older age than it ever was in youth. Now let's talk about narrative identity, your sense of who you are, the story you tell about your life, your understanding of yourself as a continuous person with a history and a character. This narrative sense of self, it actually deepens and stabilizes with age. You have more experiences to integrate into your life story, more patterns to recognize in your own behavior, more understanding of who you are and why you are that way. And here's what's interesting. Even as episodic memory declines, even as you forget specific details of recent events, your narrative memory often remains strong. You remember the arc of your life, the major themes, the important relationships and events, the person you've been and the person you've become. This is partly because narrative memory is more semantic than episodic. It's about meaning and patterns rather than specific details. And semantic memory is more stable in aging than episodic memory. So the story of who you are, the core sense of self, that often remains intact even as memory for recent details fades. You might not remember what you did last Tuesday, but you remember the overall trajectory of your life. You remember who matters to you and why. You remember the values that guide you. You remember the person you've tried to be across decades. And that narrative coherence, that stable sense of self, it provides continuity and meaning, even as other types of memory change. Think about how you describe yourself now versus how you would have at 30. There's probably more coherence now, more sense of understanding your own patterns, more clarity about what defines you. Not because you remember more details, but because you can see the patterns across those details, can understand the narrative arc of your life in ways that require the perspective of decades. This deepened narrative identity is actually protective, Sid. It provides stability when other things are changing, gives you a sense of continuity, even as memory for recent events becomes less reliable. You know who you are. That knowledge doesn't depend on remembering every day. It's built from the integration of a lifetime of experiences into a coherent story. Let's shift now to something practical. How do you actually live well with a memory that's changing? How do you adapt to the reality of forgetting without being paralyzed by it? First, you accept it. This might sound simple, but it's profound. You stop fighting the fact that your memory has changed. Stop comparing yourself to how you used to be, or how others are. Accept that this is how your brain works now, not better or worse, just different. This acceptance isn't resignation. It's realism. It's acknowledging what is so you can work with it rather than against it. When you accept that you'll forget things, you can build systems to compensate. When you accept that learning takes longer, you can allow appropriate time. When you accept that certain cognitive demands are harder, you can structure your life to minimize those demands. Resistance creates suffering. Every time you forget and then judge yourself for forgetting, you're adding emotional pain on top of the memory lapse itself. Every time you expect yourself to remember as well as you did at 30 and then feel like a failure when you don't, you're creating unnecessary distress. But if you accept that forgetting is normal for your age, that it's not personal failure but biological aging, then each lapse is just a moment to adapt rather than a reason for self-judgment. This shift in perspective from I should remember better to, of course I forget sometimes that my brain is 70 years old, it reduces suffering dramatically. Acceptance is a practice, not something you do once and you're done. Every day you'll probably need to remind yourself, to notice when you're resisting or judging, to consciously choose acceptance instead. It gets easier here with repetition, but it requires ongoing attention. Second, you compensate. You use external memory aids without shame. Calendars, notes, alarms, lists, routines, all of these are tools that work with your changing memory rather than fighting against it. Your grandparents might not have needed these tools as extensively, but they also didn't face the cognitive demands of modern life. They didn't need to remember passwords or navigate smartphone interfaces or manage the volume of information you're expected to handle. The environment was simpler. You're dealing with more complexity, so you need more support. Using tools isn't cheating. It's being smart. It's recognizing your actual capacities and creating support systems that allow you to function well despite limitations. Every person who successfully ages does this. They adapt, they compensate, they build scaffolding around their changing abilities. Think about what tools might help you specifically. a medication organizer with compartments for each day, a calendar with large spaces for writing appointments, a designated spot for keys and glasses, a notepad always in the same place, alarms on your phone for important tasks, routines that reduce the need to remember, taking medication with breakfast, exercising at the same time each day, checking your calendar every morning. These systems, they work. They reduce the cognitive load. They free up your limited working memory for things that matter rather than using it to try to remember where you put your keys. They're not admitting defeat. They're creating conditions for success. Third, you maintain cognitive engagement. You keep learning, even though it's harder. Keep reading, keep having complex conversations, keep challenging your mind with problems and puzzles and new ideas. This isn't about preventing decline. You can't stop your hippocampus from shrinking or your processing speed from slowing. But you can maintain cognitive reserve, can keep your neural networks active and engaged, can preserve function longer than you would if you let your mind become passive. Think of it like physical fitness. Exercise doesn't prevent aging, doesn't stop muscle loss or bone density decline, but it slows those processes, maintains function longer, allows you to do at 70 what you couldn't do if you'd been sedentary. Cognitive engagement works similarly. It doesn't prevent cognitive aging, but it helps maintain function, builds reserve, allows you to adapt better to age-related changes. You'll still forget things, but you'll function better overall than if you'd let your mind coast. What constitutes cognitive engagement? Learning new skills, even if it takes longer than it used to. Reading challenging material that requires concentration. Having substantive conversations about complex topics. Playing strategy games. Working on puzzles. Taking classes. Teaching others what you know. Writing, creating, thinking deeply about questions that matter to you. The key is that it should be challenging but not overwhelming. Should require effort but not cause constant frustration. Should engage your mind without exhausting you. Find the activities that interest you enough to sustain motivation despite the increased effort they require. Fourth, you take care of your brain's biological needs. Sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress management, social connection. All of these affect cognitive function, and as you age, they matter more, not less. Your brain has less reserve capacity, less tolerance for poor conditions, so creating optimal conditions becomes crucial. Getting enough sleep isn't optional if you want your memory to function well. Managing stress isn't just about mood, it's about preserving cognitive capacity. Exercise isn't just physical health, it's brain health. Sleep especially matters. During sleep, your brain consolidates memories, clears out metabolic waste, restores neurotransmitter levels. If you're not sleeping well, your memory will suffer. Not just because you're tired during the day, but because the nighttime processes that maintain memory function aren't happening effectively. Exercise improves blood flow to the brain, promotes the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus, reduces inflammation, helps manage stress. You don't need to run marathons. Moderate exercise, walking regularly, maintaining strength and flexibility. This makes a measurable difference in cognitive function. Nutrition affects brain health in ways that become more important with age. The Mediterranean diet, with its emphasis on vegetables, fish, olive oil, whole grains, has been consistently linked to better cognitive aging. Not because any single food is magic, but because the overall pattern provides the nutrients your brain needs while minimizing inflammation and vascular damage. Stress management matters because chronic stress is toxic to the hippocampus. Elevated cortisol levels over time damage the very brain region most important for forming new memories. Finding ways to manage stress, whether through meditation, exercise, social connection, or other means, is protecting your memory. Social connection matters because isolation accelerates cognitive decline. Having meaningful relationships, engaging in conversation, maintaining social networks, these keep your brain active in ways that solitary activities don't, and they provide emotional support that helps manage stress and maintain well-being. You can't control aging, but you can control many of the factors that affect how well your aging brain functions. And those factors, sleep and exercise and nutrition and stress and connection, they make a real difference. Not a dramatic difference. You won't get your 30-year-old memory back, but you'll function better at your current age than you would without attending to these factors. Fifth, you practice self-compassion. When you forget, you speak to yourself the way you'd speak to a friend, with kindness, with understanding, without harsh judgment. Your memory is changing because you've lived long enough for your brain to age. This isn't your fault. It isn't evidence of moral failure or lack of effort. It's biology, and biology deserves compassion, not condemnation. Every time you catch yourself being harsh about forgetting, pause. Notice the harshness, and ask yourself, would you judge a friend this way? Would you tell someone else they're stupid or failing because they forgot a name? Probably not, so why do it to yourself? Self-compassion isn't self-indulgence. It's not making excuses or avoiding responsibility. It's treating yourself with the same kindness you'd extend to others. Acknowledging that you're doing your best with a brain that's aging, that forgetting is normal, expected, shared by millions of people your age. Research shows that self-compassion actually improves functioning. People who are kind to themselves about their limitations cope better with those limitations. They are more likely to use compensatory strategies, less likely to avoid situations where they might forget, more able to maintain quality of life despite cognitive changes. Self-criticism, in contrast, creates stress that impairs memory further, makes you more likely to avoid cognitive challenges, which accelerates decline, increases isolation, which is bad for brain health. The harsh inner voice that says you're failing because you forgot something, that voice is actively making things worse. So practice self-compassion, not once, but repeatedly. Make it a habit. When you forget, respond with an understanding. Of course I forgot. I'm dealing with an aging brain doing its best. When you struggle with something that used to be easy, respond with kindness. This is harder now, but I can still do it if I give myself time and support. This doesn't change your memory, but it changes your relationship with your memory. Changes how much suffering you experience around the forgetting. And that matters. That affects your quality of life in ways that memory performance itself doesn't. Now, as you're lying there, perhaps the night deepening toward dawn, perhaps sleep finally approaching after these hours of exploration, let's bring this all together. Your memory is changing. This is real. The forgetting, the slowing, the difficulty with certain types of tasks, all of it is happening. And it's happening because your brain is aging in ways that follow predictable biological patterns. But you're not just declining, you're also changing in other ways, gaining wisdom, developing better emotional regulation, becoming more authentic, deepening your narrative sense of self, focusing on what matters most. These aren't compensations for loss, there are real developmental changes that come with age. The full picture of cognitive aging, it includes both losses and gains, both declining capacities and deepening ones, both frustrations and freedoms. It's more complex than just deterioration, more nuanced than simply getting worse, and you can choose how you relate to this complexity, can focus only on what's declining and feel depressed about aging, or can acknowledge the losses while also recognizing the gains, can grieve what's changing while also appreciating what's developing, can make peace with being a different kind of mind than you were at 30, not necessarily a worse one. Your memory at 70 isn't trying to compete with your memory at 25. It's doing a different job, prioritizing different things, adapted for a different phase of life. And judging it by the standards of youth is like judging a mature tree by sapling standards. Different doesn't mean worse, just different. Think about your life right now, the relationships that matter most, the knowledge you've accumulated, the wisdom you've developed, the freedom to be yourself, the clarity about what matters. Would you trade all of that for the better working memory? For faster processing speed? For easier name recall? Maybe you would. Maybe the forgetting is so frustrating that you'd give up everything else just to remember better. But maybe, if you really think about it, the full package of who you are now, including both the losses and the gains, Maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's even, in some ways, better than who you were when memory was sharper but wisdom was shallower. This isn't toxic positivity, isn't pretending that forgetting doesn't matter or that decline is actually good. The frustration is real. The losses are real. The challenges of living with changing memory are real. But the gains are real too. And acknowledging both, holding both, seeing the full picture rather than just the decline, that creates space for a different relationship with aging. One that includes grief for what's changing, but also appreciation for what's developing. One that's more honest, more complete, more able to find meaning, even in loss. As the night finally releases you towards sleep, as these hours of exploration come to their end, perhaps you can rest with a more complete understanding, not just of why you forget, not just of the biology and the patterns and the daily struggles, but of the full picture of what it means to age in a brain that's changing. Your memory is changing because you've lived long enough to age. This is the price of longevity, the cost of exceeding the 30-year plan. And yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's challenging. Yes, it is sometimes frightening, but it's also normal. It's shared. It's comprehensible. It follows patterns that make sense when you understand the underlying biology. And it's not just loss, it's also transformation, reorganization, a shift in what your brain prioritizes and how it functions. You're not broken, you're aging. And aging, when you understand it fully, when you see both what's declining and what's developing, it's not the simple tragedy it might seem at first. It's complex, nuanced, full of both challenges and unexpected gifts. Your ancestors who lived this long, they experienced the same changes, the same forgetting, the same frustrations, and they survived it, made meaning in spite of it, continued to contribute, to love, to be themselves, even as memory changed. You come from a line of people who adapted to cognitive aging, who found ways to function despite forgetting, who maintained identity and purpose and connection, even as certain capacities declined. This is in you, this capacity to adapt, to compensate, to find ways to live well even within the constraints of an aging brain. You're not the first person to walk this path, won't be the last. Every human who lives long enough experiences this. The forgetting, the changing, the need to adapt, and most of the time, they manage. They find ways to be okay, to live meaningful lives, to maintain their sense of self. You can too, not by preventing the changes, not by fighting against biological reality, but by understanding what's happening, by accepting it without judgment, by adapting to it with compassion, by building support systems that work with your actual capacities rather than the capacities you wish you had. This is the path forward, not denial, not resistance, not despair, but clear-eyed acceptance of what is, combined with intentional adaptation to make the best of it. Your memory will continue changing, that's biology. But how you relate to those changes, that's choice. You can choose understanding over fear, compassion over judgment, adaptation over resistance, appreciation for what remains over fixation on what's changing. These aren't easy choices. They require practice, require returning again and again to acceptance when frustration pulls you toward the self-criticism. But they are possible, and they make a difference. Not to your memory performance, but to your quality of life, to your ability to function well despite limitations, to your capacity to find meaning and joy even as certain capacities decline. Your memory is changing, you understand why now. You know the biology, the patterns, the daily manifestations, the full picture including both losses and gains. This understanding is a gift, not a cure, not a solution, but a foundation for making peace with aging in a brain that wasn't designed to last this long, but remarkably persistently continues to function. Sleep now. Rest in this understanding. Let the fear ease, just a bit. Let the judgment soften. Let the resistance relax. You're not broken. You're aging. And aging, when you really understand it, it's not the enemy. It's just the next phase, different from youth. challenging in its own ways, but also in unexpected ways, rich with its own gifts. Your memory that keeps you awake with worry tonight, it's the same memory that holds your life story. That maintains your sense of self, that preserves what matters most even as it lets go of details. It's doing its best with architecture designed for a different lifespan, and that best, imperfect as it is, it's enough. You're enough. Your changing memory doesn't change that, doesn't diminish your worth or your capacity for meaning or your place in the world. You're just older now, and older minds work differently, not worse. Different. Make peace with different. Make peace with changing. Make peace with a memory that's not what it used to be, but is still remarkably, still functional, still you. The night is almost over. The long journey through memory and aging and understanding is complete. What remains is just to rest, to let sleep come, to release the worry, at least for tonight. Your ancestors survived this. You will too. One forgotten name at a time, one misplaced key at a time, one moment of standing confused in a doorway at a time. It's manageable, it's normal, it's just aging. And aging, difficult as it is, it's still better than the alternative. It means you've lived, accumulated experiences, developed wisdom, become the person you are now, with all the gains and losses that entails. So rest now. The worry can wait. The forgetting will still be there tomorrow and the day after and all the days to come. But tonight, just for tonight, let it be. Let the understanding we've built be enough. Let the acceptance we've explored bring peace. You're not broken, you're aging. Your memory is changing because your brain is aging. This is biology. This is normal. This is shared by everyone who lives long enough. And you're managing. You're adapting. You're still here, still you, still capable of meaning and connection and joy. The memory changes don't change that, can't change that, won't change that. Sleep well, dream peacefully. Your changing memory has done its work for today. Preserved what matters, let go of what doesn't. Tried its best with limited resources, and tomorrow it will do the same. Imperfectly, but persistently, still functioning, still you. Good night.